I want to talk to you about America First immigration. India is China 2.0, and we've got a big problem on our hands. In 1980, no one asked the American people if they wanted to put China first or make China great at the expense of the American middle class. China was looked to as a large market to sell American products, not make them, and not a market to offshore our jobs to. We imported Chinese products made by Chinese workers, and we exported to China American products made by American workers in America. The American middle class was strong, and manufacturing was a powerhouse of the U.S. economy. American corporations became multinationals. They wanted cheap labor, despite the cost to Americans and the middle class. There is no patriotism in the multinational corporation cabal. The federal government wanted to achieve other things, mostly good relations with China and world peace. How did that go for us? What we achieved is the gutting of the middle class. An estimated 80 to 90,000 factories closed in small and rural communities across this nation. Over 5 million very good paying jobs left our shores. By the way, not just to China, but Mexico, but that's another story. America built China's economy from a third world nation to an economic powerhouse with which we have to compete. We also, consequently, built their military might, which is a national security threat, a global threat to world peace. These outcomes could have been predicted. The simple check on foolish decisions would have put the American people and their prosperity first over and above these grandiose globalist visions. There is no more robust policy than placing the growth and stability of the middle class of America above all policy considerations. The wealth and size of the middle class is the plumb line of our nation's strength and the American dream. Is India China 2.0? The answer is yes. What offshoring to China did to our skilled blue-collar working class, destroying it, India is actively pursuing, along with our U.S. multinational corporations, the destruction of our white-collar middle class. The government of India is building its entire middle class and economy by replacing American workers with Indians in the U.S. and by offshoring American jobs to India. So what is labor dumping? This is similar to China's dumping of products priced below the market into a foreign market with the intention of putting competitors out of business, destroying the industry, followed by controlling that industry and market and the pricing going forward. India and U.S. corporations have been dumping Indian workers into the U.S. since Y2K. That's like 1998, 1999 to 2000. So what happened? This cheap temporary labor began this addiction for American industry. Today, India dominates the American labor market in foreign tech staffing companies. That's right. I said foreign tech staffing companies in America who only hire Indians. Also, domestic HR departments in American companies are staffed by Indians and the workers themselves as well. Labor dumping for India is an economic strategy. It is their major export. They don't export incredible new inventions and products to the world. They don't export services that, transform industries. They don't dominate in anything like that. What they have is people. So they dump people. It's a sort of like, I don't know, a little akin to labor trafficking, human trafficking. Well, we have a report that's just come out, or is just about to come out from WorldNet Daily W&D News Center. It is a special report focusing on this question and the fraud, the corruption that is endemic in our immigration system. You will see that the nefarious practices, the collusion with American businesses, and the manipulation of our system siphon the wealth of Americans to India is all too real. Let's talk about the propaganda. For decades, big immigration and the India lobby, their propaganda machine has determined, they've set the narrative. Politicians bought it. The media and even regular Americans started to believe this. But that is changing. There is no high-skilled worker shortage in America. That is a proven fact statistically. And there never was a high-skilled worker shortage in America. Does that give you pause? Another propaganda point that American schools are producing hardworking, intelligent, exemplary graduates in the STEM fields. Well, a major multinational survey or study was done that showed that American graduates outperform Chinese and Russian students as well as Indian students. They outperform them. We have a glut of American STEM workers in America. As a matter of fact, the glut is so tremendous because of this mass immigration that 1.7 million STEM workers, graduates, are unemployed. Science, tech, engineering, math, that's STEM. They're unemployed. They've been pushed out to be replaced by foreign Indian workers. So let's look at the free market. Do we really have a free market in the United States? Not for jobs and labor. The job market in America, now think about this, is America. Unsurprisingly, Americans don't want to emigrate en masse to foreign nations to work. They want to work in the good old USA. They want to work in our beautiful country. That is their right. That is their birthright. And here, Americans pursue their American dream. Consequently, the job market for Americans is the total jobs available domestically. Well, what about the labor market? Is that different than the job market? Well, it's night and day. It's on the opposite side of the spectrum. American multinational corporations have abandoned their loyalty to this country's people, the American labor force, and families. The labor market is virtually the entire world of 8 billion people to U.S. multinational corporations. Practically speaking, the labor market is the 1.45 billion population of India, and to a lesser degree, China and others. And that's for white-collar jobs. You can already see what the problem is here. The U.S. federal government is distorting, perverting, twisting the market by flooding the U.S. labor pool with millions upon millions of foreign workers, pushing high-skilled white-collar professionals and, of course, the blue-collars from years ago out of American jobs. It suppresses their wages and it suppresses salaries. And this is for all Americans. That is a distortion of the market. That is not the free market. The federal government is driving the flooding of a saturated labor force, all to the benefit of big tech, multinationals, Wall Street, Fortune 500, Fortune 1000. It is only to their benefit, but no, it is also to India's benefit. Why? Because they send billions upon billions, tens of billions of dollars back to India instead of being spent into our local economies, our small towns, rural areas, big cities. Americans don't get the jobs. Foreigners imported into America do get the jobs. So that's a huge hit on our economy. And then the money that they make is not spent into the U.S. economy. It is sent back to India. So the bottom line is the job pool for American workers is limited, and the labor pool for U.S. multinationals is infinite. That is not a free market. So let's talk about the American dream. Is the American dream for 8 billion people of the world? No, that is an impossible flight of fancy. China can have the China dream, India can have an India dream, Iran can have an Iranian dream, Israel can have an Israel dream, Brazil can have a Brazilian dream, but there is no nation upon the earth, including America, that is able to produce a dream for the world. It's called virtue signaling. And it's also greed on the part of the American or the U.S. multinationals and Wall Street. Mass immigration steals the American dream from all Americans other than the most wealthy. And the American dream is really not the dream of the top 5% to 1%, whatever. They have it. They're not dreaming of attaining it. They already have the American dream of prosperity, stability, family, job, a home. They own the American dream already. The dreamers, the American dreamers, are those who want to rise out of poverty into the middle class and go from the middle class, maybe just maintain that, having a job, a well-paying job, challenging, innovative, creative, that you can support a family. Maybe your wife even gets to stay home and take care of those kids. And you can own a home. You can afford to own a home, and you can pay for a kid's education, whether it be trade, school, or universities. The American dream is not becoming the 1, 2, or 5% wealthiest. The American dream is a dream that most Americans have of having a flourishing life of stability and relative prosperity, and the ability to raise children and have a family that is safe and protected and flourishing itself. The invention of a real burgeoning and healthy middle class is the invention of America. For 60 years, we've been demolishing the very core of what set America apart, all the way going back to our founding era, from all other nations on the earth, that we wouldn't be a nation with the wealthy and the poor. The building of an American middle class set us apart from all other nations back in the 1700s. And that grew and grew and grew, decade upon decade. Those words, middle class and small business, should be stamped in your heart and brain as an icon of American greatness. That's how we make America great, is to make our middle massive, to shrink the lower class of income and to broaden and expand and strengthen the middle class. That's where American greatness comes from. So here's a test. What happened in 1965 that began the decline of the Black middle class? The same thing that destroyed the white middle class. The 1965 Immigration and Nationality Act opened the floodgates of immigration once again, where it had been stopped since pretty much 1924, but even possibly before that, after World War I. And during World War I, it had been shut down practically entirely. And we had a steady growth of wealth and prosperity and a growth of the middle class. All of those decades in 1965, it was over. In 1950, our middle class was at 61% of the population. 61% of the population was in the middle class of America, and that was stable or growing. In 1971, still 61%. What we should have done, and had in 65, we not opened those floodgates, we may have reached 70%, 75% middle class as a proportion of our population. But no. That's not what's happening. Let me give you the statistics for where we are now. We're at 51%. It has been declining every decade since 1971, when this immigration would have started to take hold and American jobs would be being lost and offshoring would be increasing. Of course, it skyrocketed in 1991. By then, it was down to 56%. 2001, 54%. 2011, 51%. And it's been hovering there in 2023, still 51%. We've declined by 10%. We should have increased 10%. That's a 20% difference. So two important truths I'd like to mention here. Big immigration. That's the India lobby, and that's big tech, and that is the immigration lawyers, which are huge, and all major multinational corporations, including insurance companies, pharmaceuticals, all of them. Big immigration calls us racist when Americans notice that we're being replaced with Indians and others, but it's an Indian problem. Or when Americans notice that they go to the office and over a period of 10 years, they are now a minority in their company. The Americans are minorities in their workplace. But nobody claims racism when Americans rightly point out that China is our enemy and Chinese immigration is a threat to national security and needs to be dealt with. This is I call this India the gaslight nation, because this is what is thrown in our face when we point out that India is not our bestie, but it is an adversary. And it is also very close with China and Russia and even Iran. They walk a fence. They want the wealth that America provides them, but they also want other things. And we'll get to that at the very end. No one calls us racist for talking about China endlessly, as we should, because we don't hate Chinese neighbors. We don't even hate the Chinese in communist China. We're sad that they live under, that regime. But we're going to talk about China, and no one's going to call us a racist. It's only when we talk about the massive industrial complex of immigration that the India lobby is working hand and glove with American companies to produce a replacement of American workers in our economy, in our nation. And then we're called racist. But you know what? When somebody calls you a racist, remind them this. A major study was done attempting to determine of all the nations across the world, and there were over 100 that they measured, well over 100, I believe, which were the least racist or not racist at all countries, and which were the most racist countries. So when somebody comes to you and says you're racist because you're talking about India and the threat to our national security and our middle class and our economy and our future, then you just remind them that America was identified as in the least racist category, where it's almost virtually non-existent. And India was number one. The reason Americans want mass Indian immigration and offshoring to India and India worker importation to end or be massively curtailed is because India is the problem. Let me tell you this. The politician that steps up and holds the line, making the end of mass immigration and the end of mass offshoring the center of his or her platform, will be a national hero. The same goes for our parties, whoever chooses to take that stand. Half measures will not work. The damage is too great and the corruption is ubiquitous and endemic to the system. I haven't said yet really what the solution is. There are many things that we can do. The damage can be reversed, not just halted, but reversed. Again, I said half measures don't work. And that's what we've been, playing with. And it's mostly for show. It's performative over the last many decades. Number one, President Trump must sign an executive order declaring a national security crisis and establishing a 10-year moratorium on immigration other than tourism and business, and with a severely curtailed foreign student immigration or visa program. 2, during the next 2 years, it could be longer, but 2 years sounds like a good period of time, a call by the White House, President Trump, for a national dialogue conducted entirely in the open before cameras, that needs to follow. The American people, blue-collar and white-collar workers, the poor and the middle class, Black America, leaders that are not sellouts but actually want the growth of the middle class of Black America again, and business owners, other than the multinational corporations that have had the ear of Washington in Congress and the lobbyists and all these years. Also, reporters that are independent, that are maybe citizen reporters and alternative media, and then also advocates for change and economists that advocate for change. They would be the central testimonies that the American people would hear, their stories, their data, the truths. We've had 60 years of deals conducted behind closed doors by big tech, universities, government agencies, multinational corporations, foreign governments. They're the ones creating our policy. These entities, these special interests, are creating American immigration, citizenship, temporary foreign worker visa policies. Is that insane or what? If that's as far away from America First as you could possibly get. Because, by the way, America First immigration is about America. It's not if we make multinational corporations wealthy. It's about if we make Americans wealthy. And third, and I'll just leave it at number 3, an app. Temporarily, I'm calling it the non-citizen registry. It would be launched and required of all non-citizens in the U.S., either entering or present in the U.S. So all of those who are here today that are not naturalized citizen, from tourists to business visitors, from workers, students, green card holders, all non-citizens would be registered in this app. The immigration moratorium would produce an economic boom. This is proven historically. It's a fact. We would go back to the boom that would increase our middle class. And I predict, as I said before, that it would go back to the 61% and eclipse that under President Trump's economic policies. I believe that it would expand our middle class to possibly even be 70% of our population. Can you imagine what would that do to our economy, to our national debt, to tax rolls, to revenues from tax rolls? You do know that illegal immigrants, cost America $69,000 a year per each. And that mass immigration has produced an underemployment and unemployment population, 25% of the American people. It's never been, this is not about President Trump's administration creating this kind of unemployment and underemployment. Americans have been leaving the job market for decades now because they are discouraged. I would not use discouraged, I would say despairing. They're permanently out of the job market. Tens and tens of millions of Americans who want to be working. That is a shame. This moratorium would prove to the American people that finally somebody heard their cries and is going to listen to their demands. It would create a tidal wave of support from American citizens who would flood voting booths to reward the party and the candidates who finally listen to them. Take note, Republicans, the Democrats may wise up here. I call my ongoing podcast series America First Immigration because it distills the obvious truth. Immigration is a moral good if Americans, and this means the 95%, 99% are benefited. Since 1965, America's immigration program has been a moral evil. It's time to take a stand. Prime Minister Modi of India has declared about India and China that this is Asia's century. That's right. Prime Minister Modi of India has declared this century to be Asia's century. And he was speaking of India and China, our greatest adversary. Well, I want to know if this is going